Hello, it's time for our monthly journalist roundtable. We've put together a distinguished panel for insight and analysis. Joining us now from our Washington, D.C. studio is Ching-yi Chan. He's the White House correspondent and U.S. News Center chief editor for the Shanghai Media Group. And also with us is Yasmin Alamiri. She's the senior political reporter of the online publication Rare. And from Sao Paulo, we are joined by Leo Siqueira. He is the director of the Latin America with the AIM Group and a writer and analyst. And we're joined here also in the studio by Holger Stark. He's the bureau chief for Germany's leading news magazine, Der Spiegel, here in Washington, D.C. Welcome to you all. We've got lots to cover, obviously. A busy, busy week and busy month. Yasmin, we've seen in the Middle East Turkey make incursions into Syria to take on ISIL. This is what the US has wanted for some time. But what is behind this decision? Of course, Turkey very much a victim of terrorism at the moment.
Sure. I think the timing is quite interesting because Vice President Biden was just meeting with Turkish officials in Turkey this past week, and shortly thereafter we see this military incursion by Turkey, exactly as you say, that the U.S. has been wanting this for a while. So while it's a bit of a win for the U.S. And their policy towards the fight against ISIL, I think that there are ulterior motives there for Turkey as they're really beginning to target more Kurdish fighters, which they see as encroaching on their territory, and in their minds maybe equal of a threat as the threat against ISIS. So
pushing the Kurds back while dealing with ISIL as well.
Exactly. I mean, they can't avoid ISIS because they've seen the horrible attack on the wedding party, which was pinned to ISIS. So obviously they are absolutely victimized by ISIS crimes and terror, but it's not. They haven't forgotten about the Kurdish fighters. I think that's very much in the forefront of their mind when they launch this military
incursion. And that's interesting because the US have been partnering with Kurds to take on ISIL as well.
Absolutely. It's very much an interesting situation for the US.
Holger, as you know, as Yasmin said, we had US Vice President Biden in Turkey. Let's just have a listen to what he said.
We are determined to listen to every scrap of evidence that Turkey can provide or that we could find out about. But again, I say to the people of Turkey, what possible motive could we have to, in fact, harbor a terrorist?
According to the extradition of criminals treaty between the two countries, people like him would at least be taken under custody, arrested, and remain under arrest throughout the trial. This person continues to manage this terrorist organization from where he is.
Now, Holger, that exchange really about one thing: the aftermath of the coup attempt in Turkey and the extradition, if you like, of Fethullah Gulen, who is the opposition leader here, based, weirdly, some would say, in Pennsylvania. They want him to be extradited back. We could face the death penalty. That is a big wedge, isn't it, between the US and Turkey really piling on the pressure on this one?
Yeah, I mean, the United States have made clear that there is no evidence that Fethullah Gulen somehow backed the power coup. But nevertheless, I think the political price for the United States has been fairly high because they clearly took the side of the Turkish government, as you just saw with Joe Biden's visit in Ankara this week. And they decided to sideline with the Turks against the Kurds. And that's a high price because basically what we're seeing in northern Syria now is a second front. That's a front between the Kurdish fighters and the Turkish army. There has been kind of peaceful situation over the last month. The Kurds were the most effective battlefront in the fight against ISIS. Now the US has put a lot of pressure on the Kurds as well to support the Turkish ambitions. And I think on the long run, that might be an extremely costful move.
Yeah, because obviously both Turkey and the Kurds won't be fitting together very easily. I just want to pick up, Ching-yi, because let's widen it out. There have been terrorist attacks in Afghanistan this week as well. That attack on the American university. You know, the search for stability in Afghanistan is now no longer just a US problem, is it? It's widening out. China getting very much involved. What's the view from Beijing of the unstableness in Afghanistan right now?
Right. We know Afghanistan is a very important neighbor of China. They share borders, and including the ancient passage in Silk Road. So it's very important for China to get involved in an anti-terror effort in Afghanistan. So early this year, Chinese Chief of General Staff of PLA, Fang Fenghui, visited Afghanistan and proposed a four-nation anti-terror alliance, including China, Pakistan, Afghanistan, and Tajikistan. So that shows this four nation has the same stake in the region in terms of anti-terrorism. So, and also, it's also the stability in the West Asia and Central Asia and South Asia is also very important for China's westward strategy, especially the
One Belt, One Road.
One Belt, One Road is very important for China. So we can see China is involved into the anti-terror effort in the region. That shows also China want to act as a responsible major power in the region.
Holger, also Europe hit by terrorism. We saw some figures this week that saw that France, tourism in France at this busy time, down by 1 million people. Is that affecting the rest of the continent too, Germany?
Well, I think everybody is adjusting to that and probably has the assessment that this is on the middle term, long term, a problem that all European countries will face. As long as ISIS is so much under pressure, they try to export terror. They've set up an underground infrastructure with terrorist cells, and they will strike wherever they can. So the anti-terrorism battle in Europe is something that all European countries have to face and to deal with in the next upcoming years.
I'd like to talk more about this, but we have so much to pack in. We've got to move on to something very big in the Chinese orbit coming up next week, which of course is the G20 in Hangzhou. Leaders gathering from everywhere. What's like to be resolved or not resolved?
There will be plenty of deliverables in this upcoming G20 summit in Hangzhou.
Which ones?
Just at the news conference, Foreign Ministry spokesperson Lu Kang, he said this will be very likely the most fruitful G20 summit because it expects to reach more than 30 deliverables. This will be the most in the history of G20 summit.
And what are they focusing on exactly? Obviously, you need to kickstart economic growth globally, but there's also strategic issues as well.
Right. Especially the economic issue. We see this year the Hangzhou summit actually is set against the backdrop of heightened uncertainty of global economy and also the protectionism as we see from the Brexit vote and the Americans' aversion to Trans-Pacific Partnership, TPP, and so on and so forth. So this year's economic issue will be on the top of the agenda this time.
But there might be, if I may interject, I mean, there's some level of awkward encounters that I know people like, and some reporters like me are looking for. I know that there's been the issue of whether the president will be meeting with Putin during the G20 meeting and whether they'll be discussing the issue of cybersecurity, which continues to be an issue, I think, domestically here in the United States, and also maybe something that I'm sure within polite company will not be addressed, but whether the issue of Putin and his fast friend, the Trump administration, the Trump campaign chair will come up. And to be a fly on the wall, I think during those meetings, or maybe not, the meeting would be so interesting. And we'll see. I mean, I think these summits are also a good time for these world leaders who otherwise wouldn't be in touch with each other to see what they discuss. Yeah, especially Obama, Putin, because they don't really meet anywhere else. Leo, sorry, I want to bring you in from Brazil. Developing nations such as Brazil are being invited to look at the G20. What does it mean for that sort of representation at the new, basically, global grouping that sort of dictates where economic policy goes?
I think that especially for Brazil, that's a great opportunity, especially for interim President Michel Temer, to improve the country's image, you know, that we're passing through impeachment trial, and everyone in Brazil is expecting, even the lefty party, the Workers' Party, is expecting Dilma to be finally impeached. So in Brazil, investors and the politicians in general are just waiting for this process to have an end. And I think that Brazil will try to show that the country is prepared to retake a growth, especially given the fact that the summit's topic has to do with global growth, with a retake of the global growth. And I think that's the key message Brazil will try to address.
Holger, here in the studio, obviously it's also a grouping where you have Russia, Germany and France, the contact group on the Minsk so-called agreement when it comes to Ukraine. Any signs of a breakthrough with Angela Merkel there, François Hollande and Vladimir Putin?
No, I think that would be an overestimation. I think it's moving forward step by step. This crisis is definitely overshadowed by a lot of other issues like the Middle East. I think Angela Merkel's policy is going in really like tiptoeing small steps and trying to convince Putin. Putin, on the other hand, has a severe interest in lowering the sanctions. So they will try to get closer, but there will be no breakthrough.
Ching-yi, Vladimir Putin we just talked about, but what about his relationship with President Xi Jinping? Meeting multiple times, we've seen a lot of emphasis on economic cooperation and increasingly security alignment, if not total cooperation. What do we expect at the G20 summit when it comes to China, Russia?
Right, they have, as you mentioned, they met a dozen times for the past years and appear to have developed a personal friendship, which pushed the Russia and China's relationship to the new heights. And also, Putin this time will be the chief guest of the Hangzhou summit. So they will have a bilateral meeting on the sideline of the G20. So I think they will discuss some results and some developments since Putin's last visit to China in June. So some of that development, as some experts expect, including South China Sea, East China Sea, and also the deployment of THAAD, anti-missile system in South Korea.
Yes, the terminal high-altitude defense system that Beijing and Moscow have said actually threatens security beyond the DPRK and the Korean Peninsula, right?
Right. So that would be the topic probably they would discuss, and also the economic cooperation. We see the cooperation has boomed for the past decade, as you can see.
You know, China is obviously hosting this. This is a big conference. How much is that a good thing for China to project globally?
Yes, it's also as we can see that China previously has hosted several major events, and this time, especially as what I mentioned, it will be one of the most important diplomatic events of the year because we see the economic situation in the world and also other security issue happening around the world. So this time, this will be one of the most important events of the year. So China is really trying to present well and also to act as a responsible major power in the world.
Holger, last word before we go to break.
Well, it's interesting to see how much China invested. They issued a one-week vacation so that ordinary citizens should leave the city. They went to every hotel and tried to avoid that terrorist suspects could come in. They closed churches. So they are doing really, really a lot of homework just to make sure that this is going to be a huge success.
Yeah, the security implications, of course, in such a gathering. Next up, though, we'll talk about illegal immigration to email scandals. We'll discuss the highs and very much the lows of the US presidential race. Stay with us. You're watching The Heat.